This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. Just close your eyes, but keep your mind wide open. It's Bridge to Terabithia, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. Been quite a while since we had a main episode, but we've got almost every segment, so we're going to get right into it with Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Quick reminder, if you don't know what this segment is, we're going to give a brief summary of the film and the film only, just in case you have no point of reference for the story or anything like that. So we're going to do the summary of the film, but we're not going to do the book so that we can kind of discuss those differences in the actual heart of the episode. So here is the summary of Bridge to Terabithia, the film, sourced from Wikipedia. Jess Aarons is an 11-year-old aspiring artist living with his financially struggling family in Lark Creek. He rides the bus to school with his younger sister, Maybelle, where he avoids the school bully, Janice Avery. In class, Jess is also bullied by his classmates Scott Hoger and Gary Fulcher and meets a new student named Leslie Burke. At recess, Jess enters a running event for which he has been training at home. Leslie also enters and manages to win, much to Jess's irritation. On the way home, Jess and Leslie learn that they are next-door neighbors. Jess has a difficult relationship with his father, who spends more time with Maybelle. Due to their financial struggles, his mother also forces him to wear his older sister's sneakers. One day at school, Leslie compliments Jess's drawing ability, and the two become friends. After school that day, they venture into the woods and swing across a creek on a rope. Jess and Leslie find an abandoned treehouse on the other side and invent a new world which they call Terabithia. For the next few days, Jess and Leslie spend their free time in the treehouse getting to know each other. Leslie gives Jess an art kit for his birthday. Jess becomes angry with his father for his attitude towards him, and he loses his belief in Terabithia, refusing its existence the next day at school. Later, Jess apologizes to Leslie by giving her a puppy whom she names Prince Terrian, or PT. Once in Terabithia, they encounter various creatures, including a giant troll resembling Janice, squirrel-like creatures resembling Hoger called Squogers, and hairy vultures resembling Fulcher. At school, Leslie becomes frustrated by Janice's bullying. Jess and Leslie play a prank on Janice, and she is embarrassed in front of everyone on the bus. Leslie introduces Jess to her parents, and they help paint their house. At school, Leslie discovers from Janice that her bullying is due to her abusive father, and the two become friends, with Janice later befriending Jess as well. Jess and Leslie take PT to Terabithia, where they fight off the Dark Master's creatures resembling their bullies, this time with the troll as their ally. The next morning, Miss Edmonds, the music teacher Jess has a crush on, calls to invite him on a one-on-one field trip to an art museum. When Jess goes to ask his mom, she is half asleep, and he accepts her mumbling as approval. When Jess returns home, his family is revealed to be distraught, not only because they didn't know where he was, but it's also revealed that Leslie had died after hitting her head in the creek when the rope she was swinging on snapped. Jess first denies this and runs to check on Leslie, but he notices the severed rope as well as emergency vehicles surrounding her house before eventually accepting her death. The following day, Jess and his parents visit the Burke family to pay their respects. Leslie's father, Bill, tells Jess that she loved him and thanks him for being the best friend that she ever had since she never had friends at her old school. Jess, feeling overwhelming guilt for Leslie's death, lashes out at both Hoger and Maybelle and imagines the Dark Master from Terabithia chasing after him before breaking down into tears, but his father finds him and comforts him, consoling him. Jess says Leslie is gone forever, but his father tells him that she will never be gone as long as he keeps her memory alive. Jess then decides to reimagine Terabithia and builds a bridge across the river to welcome a new ruler. He apologizes to his sister Maybelle for snapping at her and invites her to Terabithia, where the siblings agree to rule together with Jess as the king and Maybelle as the princess. The end. That is the brief summary of Bridge to Terabithia, the film. We do have Guess Who this week. Only 2 of them, but we're going to get right into that right now.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay?
This is a very brief description.
Okay.
I thought I remembered there being more. Her long, swishy black hair and blue eyes.
Okay. So, yeah, no, that is. Well, I'm going to assume, the only character, her with long black hair and blue eyes. Well, I don't actually know what color her eyes are, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is Zooey Deschanel's character, the teacher that Jess has a crush on.
It is, yes.
Yes.
Very well cast as per the description in the book. I believe her eyes are blue.
Probably, but I don't, yeah.
He paused in midair like a stop-action TV shot and turned, almost losing his balance, to face the questioner, who was sitting on the fence nearest the old Perkins place, dangling bare brown legs. The person had jagged brown hair cut close to its face and wore one of those blue undershirt-like tops with faded jeans cut off above the knees. He honestly couldn't tell whether it was a boy or a girl.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that this is Leslie, because Leslie in the movie she's just kind of eccentrically styled, but I could see maybe an inspiration being that she were kind of like a tomboy or something like that, for lack of I don't know if that's still a term we use or not. I don't actually know, but I'm going to guess that that's Leslie, because I'm assuming also that is from the perspective of Jess.
Yeah, yes. You're right on both counts. That is Leslie from the perspective of Jess.
Sweet. Yeah, those are pretty easy. That was pretty straightforward. Well, nailed it. I would imagine most of our listeners did too, because that was, if you watched the movie at least, because that was not particularly difficult. But I do have quite a few questions. We're going to get into those Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So we start off in the film introducing Jess and his kind of background and his situation, and we kind of very deftly in the film, I would say, establish the fact that his family is not well-to-do. Not only not well-to-do, but that is pretty poor and is definitely financially struggling. And one of the ways they make this clear early on is that Jess has these tennis shoes that he has duct taped up, and his mom ends up throwing them out, and he's really disappointed about this. And then she gives him, instead of getting him new shoes, she gives him some of his older sister's old tennis shoes. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the film about this is that I thought the movie did a really good job of making them feel very realistically poor. They're not like destitute or a caricature of poor people that often movies will do when they're doing like, this family is poor.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, obviously there are people like that. I'm just saying, like, this felt like a very realistic portrayal of lower middle class or lower, kind of low income family in like kind of a rural area of the country, because it seems like they're in, again, we know this is filmed in New Zealand, but they're going for, it seems like kind of a rural, like, to me it felt like rural South, Midwest, Eastern, that kind of region. So I don't know, maybe they're in like one of the Carolinas or something, or something like that. They do some farming and stuff, but it's also not like just plains or I don't know. Anyways, but the point being is that I really thought the movie did a good job, where it felt like, they had like a reasonably sized house, because this is 2007, and his parents are in their, it looks like 50s, probably 40s or 50s. So they probably had this house, for a long time, and it's a reasonably sized house, but they like grow their own food, some of their own food. They do have like a greenhouse where they grow some food, and they have clothes, and it's not like, even some of the stuff is name brand, like the shoes he gets from his sister are like Adidas shoes, but like it's like a lot of hand-me-down stuff, and like, trying to mend the stuff you have, and like they're not like, again, it feels very much like a family trying to support, 4 kids and just not having quite enough to go around, but also not like, the kids aren't like horribly malnourished or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it is that kind of very common experience that I think a lot of people can identify with. And I wanted to know if that was a similar situation that Jess's character kind of grows up in the book.
Yeah, they are very, very poor in the book. You mentioned the word destitute. I would call them near destitute.
Okay, so in the book, you think maybe they're even arguably poorer potentially.
Maybe it's hard to say, because I think of the time.
That's true. So for people who don't, which you'll probably get into this, but for people who don't realize, the book was written in 1977, and I assume set in roughly that time period. Yeah. And the film is from 2007 and is set in roughly that time period.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the movie made a lot of good little changes here, because I do think that if you transferred over exactly what was in the book, it would have ended up feeling like that Hollywood caricature in 2007 in a way that it probably didn't in 1977.
Right. Yeah. Being poor in 1977 is very different than being poor in 2007.
Yes.
It's a different kind of thing.
A different kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just his taped up shoes, and then him having to wear his sister's pink hand-me-down shoes, I think is a good change over him literally going barefoot.
Right. Which is what he does in the book.
Yeah. Okay. At least for parts of the book. Right. I think he wears shoes to school, but other than that, his shoes are saved for school.
Right.
So that they stay nice. The rest of the time he's going barefoot.
That's a classic old literature thing that I remember from books I read in high school about the Dust Bowl and stuff you know what I mean?
I don't know. I was not alive in 1977. Might have been more common then.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah.
And especially in rural areas, in very impoverished areas, but probably would not have been quite as common in 2007. I don't know.
Yeah, it is one of those things you can have a lot, I think, from what I know and understand, you can have a lot more things today while still being poor than you could in, the 70s and before eras, even, foregone eras before that. Because back then, in order to get stuff, you had to be able to make it yourself. Now, because of the exploitation of the global South and all these other things, you can get access to cheap goods and stuff. So you can literally, it's uncommon for very poor people, not unheard of, but very uncommon, I think, in the modern day for very poor people to completely lack access to things like shoes or whatever. Whereas that was not wildly uncommon 50, 60 years ago.
And then on a similar note to this, in the book, pretty much everyone except Leslie's family is about the same level of poor as Jess's family is. It's set in an area of extreme poverty, implied to be in or near Appalachia.
Okay, the movie book feels similar to me now that you say
they
Appalachia.
Talk about it being close to Washington, D.C., you could drive to D.C.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then Leslie's family, I think, is originally from Arlington. For anybody who does not have context for this, Appalachia is an area in the U.S. near the Appalachian Mountains, close to the East Coast, that is historically an incredibly impoverished area. Impoverished to the point that you almost would not believe it based on the way that the U.S. propagandizes itself.
Well, yeah, it is, famously one of the more kind of impoverished areas, and specifically and I think even still to this day in specific certain regions.
There are areas that still lack access to things like running water in Appalachia. For further reference, Appalachia is the area thought to be the inspiration for District 12 in the Hunger Games. So even more reference.
It's basically, if you're not American or don't know, it's basically between kind of the Midwest and the East Coast. But slightly closer
to the East Coast. That's
kind
a
of the
mountain
Virginia,
range.
Tennessee, Kentucky-ish further.
A very, very old mountain range. So their school in the book doesn't have a playground or even a cafeteria. They don't have a cafeteria at their school. And while I think that would have been really interesting to see depicted, I do think that it would have come off as caricature in 2007. Especially done by Hollywood with kind of the gleam of Disney over it. Plus, I kind of liked the added tension of Jess's financial situation setting him apart from his classmates, at least initially, where he's worried about getting made fun of with the hand-me-down shoes and that kind of thing.
At least to some extent. For sure. It's definitely, it feels like a pretty generic school where most of the kids are none of the kids seem well-to-do. They're all just middle class or lower middle class, but not as kind of struggling financially as like Jess's family is probably. The little thing that it cracked me up is you could tell this movie is filmed in New Zealand. So many of the kid extras were like those are like New Zealand kids. Like, well, they're like a lot of them looked indigenous, like New Zealanders. Like there was like kids in the background that did not look like they were from West Virginia. And not that there were no kids that would look like that in West Virginia, but there was quite a few times where I saw characters in the background that looked like they were kids from New Zealand, like indigenous kids from New Zealand to me. From my which makes sense again because they filmed this in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting. I was like, they have this apparently this rural school in West Virginia has an awful lot of Kiwi transfer students in it or something like that. But I just thought it was interesting. So. Speaking of the school, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the film is that he's very excited for this race he has, and he's been practicing, and he needs his special shoes for it, which his mom got rid of, but he's got to run in this race at recess. And I wanted to know if this came from the book because I thought it was so funny. Is that they have this like organized race at recess that is like student run. It's like this underground like playground race, and it's not that it's not believable because I remember as a kid we used to do all kinds of weird stuff. Like we had like organized like pencil breaking leagues on the play. You know what I mean? Like kids do all kinds of dumb shit. But it was so specific that and I was like, I don't remember us ever having like races that like we would all gather around and like everybody would like, all right, it's time for the race. And I don't know, it just was an interesting idea, and it felt to me like something that was maybe more a relic of the 70s more so maybe than 2005 or whatever, when this would be set in the film. But anyways, I just thought, because again, to me, if it was set in 2005, they'd be like playing like Pogs or something. Like they'd be doing different recess things. So I wanted to know if that came from the book.
They do have races in the book. I wouldn't call them underground races.
Okay.
There's just literally nothing else to do because the school is too poor to have actual facilities for the kids to use during recess. So they run races in a field.
That makes sense because like at recess, very often, like we mostly played like kickball or soccer or basketball or whatever. Like we had, or we just played on the playground or whatever. And in this school in the movie, they have a playground. Yes. They have some of those facilities at least. So I just thought it was interesting that racing is like the thing they do. But it makes sense to me that that's a holdover from the book because that in the book that makes
it's kind of an integral part to like how Jess and Leslie meet, right, and how their friendship starts. So we had to keep the races. I think they could have done something like turned it into them playing a sport or something, but I the racing doesn't not work. It just felt a little oddly specific to me in a way that I was like, oh, they do race? Okay, sure, whatever. Again, kids are weird, so it's not whatever. It's fine. It's just thought it was a little strange. So then after he gets beaten the race by Leslie and he's kind of annoyed at this, they then have their English class or whatever together, writing class, and Leslie goes up and is called up to read something that she wrote for class about scuba diving. And as she's reading this story, it kind of immediately draws Jess in, and he's very entranced by the story she's telling. And we get this kind of fun moment in the movie where it's like we're seeing him kind of imagine and visualize some of the stuff she's talking about, where she's talking about like bubbles coming out of her mouth when she's breathing and underwater and all this sort of stuff. It's very like kind of evocative story. And I liked the idea of these kind of two weird art kids becoming friends. And I thought it was a fun hook, something I identified with. And I wanted to know if that dynamic of him being like an artist and her being a writer, or at least ostensibly, a kid who's good at writing or storytelling or whatever, if that sort of dynamic in their relationship came from the book, because I like that. I also really liked the progression of their friendship in the film, the way they started off kind of at odds and slowly kind of honestly somewhat through happenstance just kind of become friends. I thought that worked really well, and I wanted to know again if their dynamic is similar in the book. Yeah, it's very similar. Jess does like to draw. And Leslie, we find out, is a very talented writer, very imaginative. She has a penchant for fantasy. And I would say that the movie follows pretty closely like the progression of their friendship and the dynamic that they have.
Yeah. So then after school that day, I think it's that day, they go and they end up in the woods kind of exploring, and they come across an old rope swing that Jess says nobody goes on because it's dangerous, or he does, or it's been there forever. And she's like, well, we got to swing on it. And so she hops on this rope swing and swings across it and disappears into some bushes on the other side. And I was like, oh, is this the titular bridge to Terabithia? Is it actually an old rope swing? That was my initial thought. Obviously, as we get later in the film, the actual bridge to Terabithia is a different thing. But initially, I thought, oh, it's like this rope swing is the bridge to Terabithia. I wanted to know if that rope swing being the thing that they use to kind of journey across the threshold into their fantasy land, if that comes from the book.
Yes, they do initially get into Terabithia by swinging on an old rope over the creek.
Okay. That'll be important later for tragic reasons. Once they get to Terabithia, they find this kind of decrepit old treehouse, but it is like half built and super awesome. It's like this gigantic, like multi-level treehouse that again is falling apart, but is like way super
the
cool.
Treehouse of dreams.
Yes.
And legends.
Yes, because that was that was what stuck out to me. This is like true 11-year-old me goals of like stumbling across a crazy cool old treehouse in the woods that is unclaimed, and then just like turning it into a cool hangout. They like bring candy and like art supplies and all this sort of stuff, and it just becomes their little like kind of castle in the woods. And I wanted to know if they had a sweet treehouse in the book, because I love a good treehouse.
They do not have a treehouse in the book. They do build themselves like a little shack in the woods in Terabithia. I definitely preferred the movies version here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, this is true childhood goals.
I so desperately wanted a treehouse as a kid, but you literally couldn't do it. Like, unless you lived in the middle of the woods somewhere, like somewhere where you had access to a lot of woods. Because like around me, it was all like people's, all the trees were in like people's yards and stuff. And they like, and also most of them weren't like good. Like you couldn't even build a treehouse unless you were like they didn't have the right kind of limb structure to like build a treehouse in a lot of the trees around my house. But I was always jealous. I always wanted a treehouse.
I never had a treehouse. I had a deer stand, which is close.
We built there was a lot across the street from my house that had like some woods on it, and we built like a little kind of like fort in some bushes, like trees kind of thing. Like we made like a little thing, but it was it was just on the ground. But we like kind of used branches and stuff to like close it in. But it was not a treehouse, and it was fine, but it was not nearly as good as a treehouse. So one of the other details that I really enjoyed in this movie, especially early on, was that kind of the nature of Jess and his father's relationship. And throughout the movie, I think it's really well handled. But one of the little details about the relationship that I thought was really interesting and well done in the film is that there's this subtlety between how the father, which I don't remember his name or if he even say his name, but how the father treats Jess versus how he treats Maybelle, Jess's little sister. Because Jess, as he's kind of like the oldest boy in the family, he has two older sisters.
Yeah, he's the only boy.
He's the only boy, and he's like 11 or whatever. And very much you can tell that in his father's eyes, he needs to grow up or be mature, be the man in the family. His father has been clearly beaten down by life and is fairly cynical about kind of everything at this point, because he has had kind of a rough go of it over the course of his life. And you can tell that he feels like he needs to prepare Jess for that life. Like he feels like Jess needs to kind of approach life from the perspective that he does. But in contrast to that, the father's relationship with Maybelle is very tender and very like kind of loving. And he's very, you could tell that he's still very happy to let Maybelle be a little kid and kind of protect her innocence and all this sort of stuff. While Jess, who's only a few years older than Maybelle, he's already like, no, you need to be basically an adult. Like you need to get your head out of the clouds, just like blah, blah, blah. And that subtlety and that dynamic, I thought, was really well handled throughout the course of the film, because the movie never beats you over the head with it, but it's very apparent in every interaction between Jess and his father versus the father and Maybelle. And I wanted to know if those two different dynamics came from the book, because I really liked that in the film.
Yeah, this is definitely something that is present in the book. Jess very much yearns for affection from his father, and he is at times jealous and resentful of what Maybelle and his sisters get versus what he seems to get.
Yeah.
And I thought the movie did a really good job of showing that. I agree with you. I thought it was really well handled.
Because it never descends into like cruelty, or you can tell it's not like he dislikes Jess or that he like is mean to him necessarily. Like he does things that are kind of mean or cruel or whatever, but you can tell it's not coming from a place of like malice or anything like that. It's truly coming from a place of like, this is what this kid needs, kind of thing.
Stress and anxiety.
Yes, stress and anxiety, and a desire to make sure that Jess can, kind of provide for the family if need be, or that kind of thing. And it's definitely not coming from a place of malice, but because of the dynamic, or because of the situation that the family is in, because they are as poor as they are and struggling as financially as they are, basically he doesn't have the time or the patience or the ability to give his son, at least initially, before he realizes he doesn't have that kind of time and patience to give his son like you said, the affection and the tender kind of emotional care that his son needs, again, without ever kind of falling off into a place where it's like, well, he's just a dick. Like you can kind of always understand where he's coming from, even if you don't always agree with what he's saying or his actions or stuff like that. You kind of at least somewhat understand his motivations, and there's a sympathy to what his father's going through and why he is acting the way he is. But that doesn't mean that the movie's not excusing it. The movie very clearly comes down on the side of like, oh no, you need to hug your fucking kid, you weirdo. Like yeah. So then we're introduced at the school, and we've probably already at this point been introduced, but we're introduced to Zooey Deschanel's character, which I don't remember the name of the
Miss Edmonds.
Miss Edmond.
That's her name.
That's it. And she is the music teacher, which I didn't even realize. I thought she was just a teacher who just only sang, which was what my note was here. I literally did not realize she was the music teacher, at least initially. I thought I thought she was doing like a Jack Black in like School of Rock, like we're just gonna like sing our whatever. But I wanted to know if her classes seemed to consist entirely of just singing pop songs with the class, because that is all we ever see her do in the movie.
Yes.
It's just she plays guitar and sings some random song, and the kids sing along while banging tambourines.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, even for a music class, I'm not sure this is like the most constructive. Like, I'm sure it's fun. And like, look, maybe she does other stuff, but that is literally all we ever see is just her leading sing-alongs. And I'm like, all right. I wanted to know if that came from the book, because I thought that was funny.
Yeah, that's pretty much all that's described in the book for her music classes, except it's 1970s folk songs instead of like pop from,
which it's not all pop. It's like kind of an eclectic mix of stuff. But yeah, it is. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting lesson plan, shall we say? So then one of the other characters in the film, who's kind of a side character, is Janice Avery, who is a bully. She charges people to go to the bathroom, and just picks on people and is a big jerk. She's also in 8th grade, and I think they're in 7th grade or 6th grade. They're like a grade below.
In 5th grade.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. I didn't know they were that further. Yeah. But she's a few grades ahead of them and is older than them, but she's like the big bully. And she's been picking on them this whole time, and ultimately they prank her by basically pretending, like giving her a note that they pretend is written by like the popular boy, saying that he like has a crush on her. And then she like not confronts, but like, goes up to the popular boy, approaches the popular boy. And then they're all like, what are you talking about, weirdo? And so she gets kind of like, made fun of by everybody for this. But then later they realize, and they end up feeling bad. I don't remember how it comes to pass, but Leslie ends up having a conversation with her, finds something out where she realizes that Janice is like basically abused by her father at home. And she is lashing out as a bully because her home life isn't, good. and they end up feeling really bad about this, and they kind of sympathize with her. And I wanted to know if that whole subplot came from the book, because I thought it was, pretty well handled in the film.
Yeah, that plot thread plays out like almost completely the same. There's a few details changed here and there, but is pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah, I will say this movie does a couple times maybe veer a little too much into the which I don't think it's not completely out of place, and it didn't bother me too much. But there's a couple times in this movie where the big triumphant moment is just like punching a kid in the face. And like, I'm there's some times where you gotta punch a kid in the face, I think, maybe depending on the situation as another kid, but like there's like, because the moment where like later on, which I have a note about here just before too long, where Jess punches one of the other bullies in the face in class, but then there's another moment, even maybe right after that, I can't remember, where one of the other bullies is making fun of Jess, or the fact that Leslie died. I can't remember. But we then see that bully walking to the bus like with a bloody nose, and Janice is like rubbing her knuckles, and it's just like, and again, it's played completely like nice, and I don't disagree. Like, those kids were assholes and like whatever. I don't know. It felt like the movie was like, yeah, no violence, that solves those problems. It just felt a little like, I don't know, cavalier about beating up kids.
I have more thoughts on that stuff.
Okay,
later
cool.
too.
We'll get to it.
Yeah.
We'll get to it. So then we gotta get to the big, one of the big moments here towards the end is that on a Saturday, Zooey Deschanel calls up Jess, because she has found out at this point that Jess is into art. She's seen some of his art and is like, hey, you're a really talented artist, blah, blah, blah. And then randomly on a Saturday, she calls him up and is like, hey, I'm going into the city. It was supposed to take my nephew or something, but they can't come. Do you want to go to the art museum? And he's like, goes and asks his mom, and she's like asleep and is like, "Rah," and doesn't. And then he goes, so he's like, yeah. And so he goes on this field trip I say field trip. This is not what a field trip is. He goes on this trip to the art museum with Zooey Deschanel, and I wanted to know if this came from the book, because I was like, you can't
really
do
can't
that.
You really can't.
I was like, this is the most 70s thing. This has to be from the book, because there's no way they added this for the movie, because this is a thing that you simply could not do post, I don't know, 1995 probably. I don't know like when that line was, but there was a period at some point around the 90s, I would guess, where that became a thing that is just not, you can't as a teacher just call up a student and be like, want to go on a field trip with just me? Anyways. Yeah.
So yeah, that is from the book. Still felt weird reading it. Even though I guess maybe it probably wouldn't have been that strange when the book was written.
Probably not. Yeah.
Maybe somebody who was in school at the time can weigh in. Maybe that wouldn't have been weird. Still feels weird.
I think the thing that feels weirdest about it is the way it happens. I don't think it would be particularly weird if the teacher had reached out to the parents and was like, hey, your kid's really into art. I'm going to the art museum on Saturday. I'd love to take them and kind of show them this stuff. I don't think it, I don't think it's super necessarily weird for a teacher to like take a single student on a field trip in a specific scenario where it would maybe make sense. But again, you would go through the parents for that. Yeah. The fact that she calls Jess specifically and asks is insane.
Like, somebody's losing their teaching license.
That is insane. Because that's the thing I was going to mention. I actually did a similar thing in second grade. My second grade teacher, I went on a field trip. I believe it was just me and one other kid went on a field trip with my second grade teacher, just the two of us. But that was like an official thing through. Well, it was kind of a thing she did, like an end of the year thing where it was like some sort of class. We did something throughout the year where if you got enough you had to do a bunch of different like things in class, and if you did all these different things, the kids who had the two best scores or something got to go on this special field trip with the teacher to like do these handful of things or whatever. And so that was kind of like a similar thing, but that was all, again,
like school sanctioned.
It was like, at least to some extent, yeah. Like, and my parents, it was not like it was like an official, like it was all through my parents.
Your teacher didn't call you up on a Saturday morning.
My teacher did not just call me on Saturday and be like, hey, I'm heading to the fucking art museum, the city museum. You want to come? Because I think we went to the city museum and some other, and like the zoo or something like that. But it was, again, that was like all planned out. The teacher, my parents knew about all this. It was like, yeah, it wasn't just a sporadic kind of thing. I thought that was crazy. But
Yeah. Yeah, it really does not transpose well to 2007. But the end of the story kind of hinges on Jess being like unexpectedly gone that day and nobody knows where he is.
right.
So
Yeah, I think you probably could have handled that
different.
basically the same, but just not have his parents, just have his parents know. Like, I don't know why it necessarily takes away from the story if his mom officially endorses it. It takes away from them freaking out thinking something happened to him, but we don't even see that in the movie to where it really like matters that much. He gets back and they're like, "Oh my God, we thought you were dead. Oh, by the way, your friend's dead." If it just gets back and everybody is like super somber and upset, and then they reveal that his friend is, I feel like the impact is not that different by losing.
Yeah, I guess.
By losing the like 3 seconds of them being concerned about him, and then that immediately go. You know what I mean? Like, I think if his parents just know, oh yeah, you can go on that field trip, and then while he's gone, I don't know. I don't think
Yeah.
thematically that changes that much. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever. But it's just, I think that would make it feel like a little, like it's a little less of a leap there to be like, yeah, sure. Anyways, again, she thinks he got permission from his parents, but you're an adult. You
need to
gotta
talk to the
talk to the
parent.
parents. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the conversation should have been, "Oh, put your mom on the phone."
Yes. Yeah. So while he's gone, as we mentioned, Leslie is going to Terabithia. She swings on the rope and ends up breaking, and snaps, and she falls into the creek, which we had established is like really high and like rushing because they've had a lot of rain recently, and she ends up drowning. And I wanted to know if that's how she dies in the book, because I thought that was interesting, because I remembered in the story, or in the prequel, we talked about how this was based on a real story that happened to the author's son, who was actually the screenwriter for this movie. But it was like his friend got struck by lightning or something like that, and ended up dying. And I wanted to know if maybe the book was maybe closer to the lightning thing, or if the same thing where the rope swing that they used to get to Terabithia breaks, and that's what.
Yeah, no, that is what happens in the book. The rope breaks.
So then we get kind of all of the horrific aftermath of this, which is kind of the meat of this movie. I don't want to say the whole movie has, we'll talk about the trailer here in a minute, but the whole movie is kind of about just like relationships, and obviously from this point forward, it's about loss and grief and kind of dealing with that.
Yeah. And the growth that can come from that.
Yeah. But there's one line that I wanted to know if it came specifically from the book, because it just really, it got me. Is that he's in class? No, they're
at the wake.
They're at the wake. Yeah, they're paying their respects at the Burke's house the next day or whatever. And Miss Edmund is there, because she's also obviously paying her respect. And he sees her and he walks over to her, and they're kind of chit-chatting briefly. Both of them very distraught. But in that moment, he says to Miss Edmund, he goes, "Next time we should invite Leslie to go. She'd like that." Because he has still clearly not processed, obviously, what has happened here. Or at least not fully. He has to some extent, but not fully. He's going through the stages of grief, shall we say. And but I wanted to know if that line came from the book, because
that specific line is not from the book, but I do think that the movie and baby Josh Hutcherson overall did a good job with Jess's 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
He like in the book, he very clearly goes through each of the 5 stages of grief.
In the movie too.
Yeah.
Like he definitely initially, he runs over that he doesn't believe it. What is it? Denial,
anger, bargaining.
Some grief, something grief, denial, bargaining,
Hang on.
anger, bargaining. He definitely goes through all those stages, whatever.
Yeah.
I think acceptance.
It's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Right.
Yeah.
He definitely goes through all of those in the movie as well, for sure. We see each of those kind of stages, maybe a little quicker than they are in the book potentially, but he definitely goes through all of those stages as well. So I think the movie does do a good job.
The movie does a good job. It's very clearly and almost like pointedly portrayed in the book, which I thought was really interesting because this is, we remember, a book for children. And I thought it was kind of an interesting way to maybe help a kid grapple with those ideas to
Oh.
like portray it in a very like clear manner.
Yeah, I thought the same about the movie. I thought that this movie would be an incredibly powerful, like, kind of tool for helping kids kind of understand that process. Even in the film, I think because I do think the movie does such a good job of kind of showing all those different stages and not judging any of them, and like kind of, you know, being very sympathetic to Jess's emotions in all of those different stages and not denying them. And I think that whole scene, which actually is another scene I wanted to ask if it came from the book, because I thought it was really good and really powerful, is this scene where after he punches, well, I'll just ask that next and then we'll get to the other moment that I don't have in my notes. But so my next question was, does he just clobber that one bully? Does he just punch the shit out of the one kid who makes a joke about Leslie dying?
No, he doesn't in the book. But I actually like.
Is there a
change.
moment where the bully like says something, or no?
I don't think so. There might be. I don't remember. But I liked that change. I liked that kind of like moment where the straw finally breaks, right? And he like is kind of catapulted into that anger stage.
Yeah.
Also in the book, he actually hits Maybelle.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I think having him lash out more violently at like an actual bully, you know, like somebody who's his own size.
Yeah.
And then just push Maybelle.
Yeah, he pushes Maybelle.
Yeah,
but,
I think that was a good switch.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely think that. I think that helps. Well, my next question that I didn't have in my notes that I now, because I just forgot how much I enjoyed the scene in the movie, is right after that the teacher kind of yells at him, and she's only been in a handful of scenes, and she seems like kind of a jerk.
She's portrayed as like kind of a strict, like very traditional by the book kind of a teacher.
And you think he's just gonna get in trouble in this moment, it seems like. But they go out, she's like, wait for me out in the hall, and he goes out in the hall, and then she comes out and she talks to him. And I thought this scene again was just incredibly well written and acted by both of them. But she's actually very sympathetic to him and goes, look, she just kind of launches right into it, and she says, when I lost my husband, and she kind of talks about all, she goes, people kept telling me not to cry and to do this, that, and the other thing. No, I don't remember everything she says, but she kind of goes through this whole speech. And none of the things in this are groundbreaking revelations about grief, but for a child, I think they're all delivered so, and even for an adult, again, it was effective for me. Like it worked on me.
I don't think it needs to be groundbreaking
no, not at
to
all.
be effective, and especially when you're talking about something that is as complicated and as complex as grief. I think it can be really helpful to have it just laid out very simply and to talk about it in very simple terms.
No, I agree completely. And I again, especially for the target audience, which is, young people, kids and younger adults and that sort of thing. But they have this conversation, and she goes to kind of this whole thing about, people kept telling me not to cry or to blah, blah, blah. And, that it just doesn't work that way. And it's fine to cry, and it's fine to be upset, and it's fine to be angry, and all this sort of things. And yeah, I wanted to know, basically my question was, does any of that scene come from the book with that teacher? Okay.
Yes, it does.
Because I just really liked that scene. I thought it was, because it was surprising, because I wasn't expecting that from that teacher in that moment, which I thought was nice. Is it just like a random conversation? Because obviously he doesn't hit the bully, so like if it doesn't really matter. But I was just kind of wondering what the prompting for that conversation in the book was, because it doesn't come off the backs of him punching a kid.
Mrs. Myers barked the command to stand for the allegiance. He didn't move. Whether he couldn't or wouldn't, he didn't really care. What could she do to him after all? Jess Aarons, will you step out into the hall, please?
Okay.
Then he goes.
So basically, he's just being obstinate, and that's Okay. Just a couple more quick questions here. So then we get to the point where it's like, oh, so that's the titular bridge to Terabithia. At one point, he goes into Terabithia, and Maybelle tries to come across, and this is the scene we talked about, where he pushes her, where she's like trying to come across, and she can't get across this log that is like across the creek. And he has to like kind of rescue her and throw her back, or bring her back to the other side. But then he gets mad at her because it's not her, it's him in Leslie's place, and so he like pushes her. But then afterwards, after all this happens, he has this big breakdown and he kind of freaks out and he finally accepts, he starts, his dad ends up finding him at one point, which does that come from the book?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Where his dad kind of finds him, embraces him, and finally gives him the affection that he needs in this moment. But then after that, he kind of realizes he needs to mend things with Maybelle. So he decides to build the actual bridge to Terabithia. So he goes and he finds all this lumber. He gets all this lumber from Leslie's family's house that they weren't using. And he builds this big bridge on the tree that is across so that Maybelle can get across over to Terabithia. And I wanted to know if that's the titular bridge to Terabithia.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And he does build a bridge across the creek at the end of the story.
Okay. It's a really sweet scene. I think one thing, maybe my only critique of the films from a story, like narrative thematic perspective, would be that I think they could have used a scene earlier, unless I'm forgetting that happened, of Maybelle trying, like seeing them swinging across the rope or something and wanting to go across or wanting to join them and not being able to. Because I think it still works with just the one scene earlier where she tries to cross the log and can't. But I think if they had built more if they had established a little more of her desire to be included in that, because it just kind of seems to almost come out of nowhere at the end. Not nowhere, but I don't know. I just felt like if that could have been a little bit more of a running through line, it would have made the ultimate moment at the end even more impactful. As it is, it still works really well. But that was just one little thing. I have a technical critique we'll get to in a little bit of this film, but
the bridge was the way that we learned to manage our emotions along the way.
Yes, absolutely. And then finally, my last question is: him and Maybelle get across the bridge and end up in Terabithia, and he shares this fantasy land with her, and they're kind of looking around, and all the inhabitants of Terabithia walk out. And they kind of survey this kingdom, and the inhabitants of Terabithia in the film are wild. We had never really seen any of them. We had seen some creatures up until this point, like the squirrel thing and the giant and the Dark Master and a couple other the whatchamacallit,
the troll.
The troll. Yeah. Well, I said the troll. There was something else.
The vultures.
The vultures. Yeah. That was it. We had seen those, but we hadn't seen any other people, humanoids or whatever, other than the troll, I guess. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. They all show up and they're very unique and interesting character designs that made me think they almost had to come from the book, because there's quite a number of people that are birdcage people. There's several of these people that are they have heads, but then their torsos are like a bird cage with a bird in it. And I thought it was so interesting, and I needed to know if any of those descriptions came from the book or where that was dreamt up from.
I don't know where this was dreamt up from.
Okay.
Not the book. We don't ever actually see any of the quote unquote inhabitants of Terabithia in the book. They exist only in Leslie and Jess's imaginations, and they are not described.
Okay.
I did think that the designs were really interesting, particularly the birdcage people.
I mean, that was just wild, yeah. Well. And I was trying to think if there was a reference that I was missing, because I was assuming it was going to be something from the him and Leslie's life. You know what I mean?
They talked about or something.
Yeah, but I couldn't place a moment earlier about a bird cage. You know what I mean? Or her talking about having a pet bird or something, and I couldn't remember anything. That would have been, this birdcage thing would have been in reference or thematically referencing. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. I also, because neither of them particularly come from a place of feeling I don't think either of them are caged birds necessarily thematically prior to getting to Terabithia. I wouldn't say particularly that doesn't feel like true.
Yeah, that would not also. That would not be a metaphor that I would reach for.
Yeah, so I just thought it was interesting that specific design of character showed up. I was I wonder where that comes from, because it's so specific and interesting, but also it doesn't feel super thematically resonant to me in any specific way that I'm missing something. Anyways, I just thought it was super interesting. So apparently it doesn't come from the book, but yeah, I did. Like I said, I talked about in the prequel that some of the designs of stuff were inspired by Terry Gilliam and some of these other filmmakers who had really wild, kind of interesting characters, designs and stuff. But yeah, okay, so you can't help me there.
No.
on that. All right.
I do have more thoughts on the movie's decision to include fantasy creatures in Better in the Book.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you want to talk about the trailer here.
Yeah, I might as well.
Wait.
That's the end of my questions for was that in the book. But we talked about in the prequel that there was a lot of outrage about the trailer for this movie.
Yeah.
And when I watched the trailer, which I always watch the trailer to edit it into the prequel episodes, like some clips from it. And I watched the trailer, and it was mind blowing. I hadn't seen the movie yet, obviously, so I didn't know for sure. But from what I knew, I was like, this seems crazy to me. But now having watched the movie, the trailer, whoever edited that, or not whoever edited it, because I'm sure whoever edited it, it was from some direction of some studio head asshole or something, probably. But whoever's decision it was to do the trailer that way needs to be fired into the sun. Like, I don't. You could not more misunderstand. It's so clearly some bean pusher who was like, Lord of the Rings is big.
Yeah, Harry Potter's big.
Chronicles
Narnia
of Narnia
is big.
We gotta bank on that.
We gotta pull that audience in.
Because if you haven't,
what, you already have that audience.
So
they all read this book.
Crazy. If you go watch the trailer, the original trailer for this movie, you would have if you watched that trailer and then went to the movie, you would be so confused that this is the movie you're watching, because the trailer is literally only them walking around in Terabithia, and some of the stuff in that trailer I swear is not even in the movie. Like, it's just like fantasy, like it's all just this fantasy land, and the music sounds straight out of the Lord of the Rings. It's like this epic, like plotting action, like Helm's Deep music or whatever, and it's crazy that somebody decided. Now look, I can understand the idea of maybe trying to do something where you're like trying to like pique the interest of people who haven't read the book, and
yeah, but then they're gonna be disappointed when they go to see your movie.
Yeah, no, what it needs to be, so like I can understand, it's hard to explain. I can almost understand the idea of using something like that for a trailer, but you would have to be really clever about how you did it. So like, for example, and this is a very random specific example, but it's just in my head because I was just thinking about it. I just directed a short film that I did a couple weeks ago, and we needed for a film festival competition thing. And if people know what it is, it's a 48-hour film festival. You get 48 hours to make a short film. Me and a bunch of people did this project, and at the end of it, afterwards, they ask you if you want, you can put together a poster and a trailer to like use for promotional stuff or whatever. And we were talking about making a trailer for it and like what the trailer would be if we made a trailer. And I don't know if we're even going to, because I don't think any of us have time. But we had talked about what we could do if we were going to make the trailer. So long story short, the short film is about, the premise really briefly is about a guy who inherits an old house, wants to turn it into an Airbnb, decides he needs a marketing angle, so he's going to sell it as a haunted Airbnb, but he doesn't have ghosts. Hijinks ensue. It's a dark comedy, whatever. But we had talked about for the trailer, just doing this thing. The way the short film starts is with a commercial advertising his Airbnb. And we talked about just making that commercial the trailer, basically, which is kind of, I think, maybe a similar-ish adjacent type thing that doesn't really at all, because the commercial in the movie, you don't see any of the characters in the movie, you don't see any, it's just literally this house and a voiceover of a guy talking about a haunted Airbnb and like selling this haunted Airbnb. And we thought that could be like kind of an interesting, effective trailer for this movie that we're doing. But it also would be similarly like not at all advertising what this movie is necessarily. But I think it would work.
I think that would work. I think that's different.
I agree that it's different, but I don't know if it's... that was just the first thing that came into my head as like slightly similar kind of thing of like where it doesn't really show what the movie is about at all, but it's like... Right. I don't know.
But it is still a short film about a purportedly haunted Airbnb.
Well, and this is still a movie about a fantasy land, like kind of,
but not really. But not in the way that the trailer implies.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I guess that's fair.
Like
I don't
not
know.
at all in the way that the trailer implies.
That's fair. Yeah. Nah. Anyways, Point being, yeah, trailer's terrible. It's like crazy, and I legitimately think you could make a case for like maybe suing the studio as a moviegoer if you bought a ticket based on the trailer, thinking you were getting Chronicles of Narnia, like a different Chronicles of Narnia, and then you're like, wait a second, what? This is just kids in school dealing with bullies and like becoming. Wait, what is happening? There's not even like they don't even see a magical creature, quote unquote, until like 45 minutes into the movie, and it's very clear it's not real. Like it's wild. All right, that was all I had to say. Katie, it's time to find out what you thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
Speaking of the fantasy creatures in this movie, as I mentioned, we don't see any fantasy creatures in the book. The kids talk about them as they're like playing pretend, but we don't see them with air quotes around the word see. I get what the movie is doing. I get it. I don't need it explained to me. But I think that the book does a better job of grappling with the concept of imagination and how that works, especially when you're playing with another person. What the movie does to me just feels too seamless, and it doesn't feel accurate to how playing pretend works, at least as I recall it. It feels like they're somehow imagining the exact same thing in a very seamless way. Like what would have been more accurate, in my opinion, is if they had kept stopping and saying, okay, but what if? And then like the creature or the scene would change. I don't know. I don't think, like, I get what the movie's doing. I get what it's trying to do, but I don't think it succeeded.
I would agree insofar as that I almost made this my Lost in Adaptation question. I almost did a Lost in Adaptation question that was basically this exact thing, because I had a similar feeling of there was moments when they're in that fantasy world. My question was going to be, is there any explanation for how they're seemingly, like, what is going on when they're imagining these things? Because there's moments where things are happening and they're all just interacting. Like I say both of them are interacting with these magical creatures in a way that I'm left wondering what is happening in reality.
Yes.
Like in particular, the scene that really stuck out to me was like where they're fighting the squirrel creatures and stuff, and they have like logs, and it's like they're like
they're like
on the ground,
grappling with them
and all that sort of stuff. I was wondering like if this stuff is in the book, what is described as being happening in these moments and stuff. And so that I agree completely, because that was like my note was like, what am I meant to be getting necessarily? Again, I think overall it just kind of works if you don't really think about it. You're just like, whatever. It's fantasy. They're like, it's whatever. Like the point of the movie is such that to me, it kind of renders this irrelevant to some extent overall, but it still, in the back of my mind, there was that like nagging little like, but wait, what is, how is this working? How are they imagining the same things really, like instantly together?
It fussed with my ability to suspend reality in a way that I did not enjoy.
I don't think it was quite that like, wasn't quite that much of a hang up for me. Again, I was able to just kind of like, but it was almost enough that, like I said, it was going to be my Lost in Adaptation question. So I totally get where you're coming from.
I think I hated the free to pee chant in the movie.
It was not my favorite. I did almost ask about that was that in the book, but
yeah. So Janice, we established, charges a fee to enter the bathroom at the school.
I couldn't tell if they were chanting free to pee or free the pee.
I think it was free to pee.
Probably, but free the pee is like the more classic version of that chant.
Right. I don't know. I kind of hated it.
Either way, I don't like it. But
Also, where were any of the teachers for this? Like, I get that bullies can get away with a lot, but
Oh, yes.
surely a daily bathroom shakedown wouldn't fly completely under the radar for long.
No, it would be one of those things where eventually, because eventually at some point, some kid would say something, and a teacher would be like, "Oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, if the girl literally like blocking the door to the bat,
Yeah,
like, they're not
or
going to
you
let
would
that."
like see
Yeah,
that she was standing there demanding money from kids every day.
yeah. Again, not to say that a lot of bullying doesn't happen without anybody noticing or whatever. It does, but like this is a very specific kind of bullying
Yes.
that would. I agree. It would not. I don't think it would. I don't think it would fly for very long.
In the book, Leslie calls her parents by their first names. I don't think she does this in the movie.
I don't remember.
If she
honestly.
did, I missed
her
it.
parents are in
Yeah,
one
her
scene
parents
with
are not
them.
in very much of it. But she calls her parents by their first names. She calls, I believe, Bill and Judy are their names in the book.
She might. I can't remember.
But that was something that I thought would have transferred to 2007 just fine.
Oh yeah.
I think it would still
Absolutely.
make people uncomfortable, especially a kid raised more traditionally like Jess.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Yeah. That
Yeah,
would work.
just a thing that kind of adds to her like weirdness.
That translates
and, like,
to any time period.
hippiness.
That that translates to every time period. I don't know if there will ever be a time where a kid that age, like under the age of like maybe 16 or 17 or
Mhm.
15, somewhere around that line is where it becomes a little less weird. Even then, it's
a little.
weird for some people. But like any kid, especially like their age, like 11,
Yeah.
calling their parents by their first name would be very even today, and I think forever. I think that will be a thing that is considered pretty
In
strange.
perpetuity.
Yeah, I think that will be a thing that would be considered kind of strange and unique.
In the book, it's established that Janice Avery smokes in the girls' bathroom. Now, I in no way expected this to make it into a Walden Media
0%
Disney production
chance.
in 2007, but it was a little detail in the book that I kind of enjoyed. I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
It was very like it's that thing, you know? You know what I mean? Like smoking in the girls' room.
Yeah.
That's just what the bully does.
Yeah.
That's that
Just
thing.
what they do. Smoke in the bathroom.
A thing that I thought was really interesting in the book was that Jess's family, we establish, only goes to church on Easter. And they totally come off as the type of people who are strict about going every Sunday. And I enjoyed having that expectation shattered.
And interesting, because in the movie they
Yeah,
seemingly go
seemingly
every
they
weekend.
go every
because
week, yeah.
he says we go to church on Sundays,
Yeah.
like, which makes it sound like they go every Sunday.
And I get why the movie wouldn't want to like spend time establishing that, but I thought it was very unexpected to me, and I thought that was really interesting.
I will say that I actually find that less unexpected. I actually found it a little strange that I was actually surprised that not only they went to church every Sunday, but they went to such a like kind of strict church, because they didn't strike me as a particularly religious family.
Fair.
Like, and I think there's actually something, I think that's is interesting in the book, and I do like that detail of them only going on Easter, because it's, there's this weird, at least in my experience, there's this kind of weird dichotomy of the fact that like poor people tend to be more religious than wealthy people generally. I think statistically, at least, like higher income tend to be less religious than lower income people, just as a general rule. But that being said, I think it's not uncommon for poor people to not really have time to like
It's
go
fair,
spend
yeah.
time in church on Sunday. They got to like do chores. They got to do their farming, or you know what I mean? Like
Right.
a family of this kind of income might literally not have time to go spend a couple hours in church every Sunday, potentially. I don't know. I think there's kind of interesting dynamics to it all around, but yeah. I love the movie's version was also interesting in its own way, because again, I was not expecting, they go to a church where the women can't wear pants. Like they go to a church that
Yeah.
is,
And that also is, I think that's like a 70s thing that they didn't bother updating, potentially.
It depends on where they are and what kind of church
Well,
they're
no,
going to.
I know that there are churches where the women have to wear skirts
Yeah.
today. I'm saying that like when they do go to church on Easter in the book, it doesn't, the fact that they all have to wear skirts and that like Leslie has to wear a dress to go to church with them came off to me more as like
because
a
it's an
symptom of the
occasion.
time period
okay.
rather than, oh, they're at like a super strict church.
Right, yeah. Which I will say that it maybe causes a little bit of weirdness of what I was talking about in this film is that obviously there are churches like that, but it felt a little strange to me for this family to be going to a church like that because they don't seem the father's like his dynamic didn't feel like a religious like zealotry
I
father.
agree.
He felt like
I agree.
a pretty normal guy. And I don't not to imply that somebody going to like a very strict religious church couldn't be a normal person, but like that his sternness and stuff didn't feel religiously motivated to me in the film. It felt financially and like life motivated more.
I mean, I agree with you that they don't feel particularly religious.
Yeah.
In the movie,
the mom is always wearing like a cross and stuff in all the scenes, but like other than that, I don't know. They just didn't. Yeah, they didn't come across particularly like we go to a super religious.
The other interesting thing is that like the kind of churches where women have to wear skirts also tend to not be ones where you just go on Easter.
That is true, yeah. Which is why in the movie it makes more sense to go every Sunday. And I don't want to, obviously there are people who go to those kind of churches who are not, who go to more strict churches, but in their day-to-day lives are not, don't really like kind of abide by that same type of stricture or whatever. It is just kind of interesting that it just surprised me a lot when he was like, "Oh, the church we go to, you can't wear pants." I was like, "Oh, you're that kind of Christian family?" That was not what I was expecting.
So then after they go to church, we get in the movie the conversation about like Jesus dying and if you don't believe in the Bible, then you go to hell.
Yeah.
Which does come from the book, except the movie leaves out at the very end of that conversation and at the end of the chapter, and Maybelle says, "But Leslie, what if you die?" And it's Baby's first foreshadowing, because she dies like 2 chapters later.
Right.
But I really enjoyed the writing in this book, despite that, or maybe even because of that. Like this book, it tackled tough topics while still being written at the appropriate reading level, while not talking down to its audience. And I can see why it is so often used in classrooms, because it is chock full of like Baby's first literary elements, just easy examples, but that aren't so on the nose that you feel like you're reading something that was written for an English class.
Yeah, no, that's a very fine needle to thread.
Very fine line to walk.
Yeah, it's very tough.
And I thought that Catherine Patterson did a really, really good job with it. Movie note, Troll Janice. Yeah. I was not prepared.
I was not either.
I was not ready.
Nah, it's not like it looks terrible. It's just the face is like, whoa, you're really not like overall the CG in this looks like okay. And it's aged pretty well, all things considered. But yeah, the face of Janice on that troll was just like, what? It's just not.
It was a jump scare.
Yeah, it really was. I don't know, strange, startling, upsetting. I don't know.
The book had a lot more buildup with it raining more and more, and them like continuing to swing across in the rain with the creek getting higher and higher, and Jess getting just increasingly like anxious and nervous about swinging across the creek. The movie did that a little bit, but the buildup in the book is like truly awful.
Yeah.
Like truly ties knots in your stomach, especially when you know what's coming.
Yeah.
A small but also huge change. In the movie, Jess purposefully leaves Leslie behind when he goes to the museum with Miss Edmonds. In the book, he just forgets. Like, doesn't even think to ask her because he's so excited. And it's not till like much later on that he's like, oh, Leslie would have liked this.
Yeah.
I didn't even think to invite Leslie. And so in the book, we're dealing with like truly unfounded guilt, which calls for a very nuanced approach. And I get why the movie made this change, because I'm not sure that it could have gotten that nuance across. And I don't hate this change. I don't even dislike it. But after reading the book, it did feel a little on the nose to me to have him like literally look over at her house and be like, nah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It is tough because I do I think there's a lot of interesting layers to the movies version of him consciously deciding not to invite her. That's a whole different type of guilt.
Yes.
That is,
It's a different type of guilt in each. And it's so interesting to me because it's such a subtle change. Like it's a small change, but it's also a huge change.
yeah. I don't know if I would describe it as small at all. It's a pretty. I mean, I get what you're saying in the sense that like in the grand scheme of like what happens, it doesn't change much, but it is like obviously motivationally, it's like a huge
Yeah.
change because yeah, it makes. I think it makes handling his guilt and his grief and everything much more complicated in the movie than it is in the book. Like in the book, it's like, or at least from what it sounds like, in the book, it's like, you know, he didn't think about it. Like it's different, obviously, and there is still obviously there would be guilt and you know issues that he would be dealing with. But in the film, the fact that he consciously made the decision not to invite her, to me, makes that way more difficult to deal with than the sort of just not even thinking about it. At least like to me, if I made the conscious decision to not invite a friend and then they died to something and then they ended up getting in a car accident or something versus like I just went to a thing and didn't even think to invite them because it was just
But
like a
he
random.
still feels guilty. He still feels responsible.
Right. And I think you still would. I'm not saying that you wouldn't. I'm just saying that it would be way harder to grapple with my guilt in the movie scenario than it would be in the book scenario.
I think it's just different.
You don't think it would be more? I agree it's different. And I agree they both have their
Because I think
interesting layer.
he feels responsible either way.
I agree he feels responsible, but I think it would be, I would have, and I agree you would feel responsible either way, but I think it would be much easier to get over the books version. At least to me, I think I would have a much easier time kind of coming to terms with and getting over the guilt I felt in the books version of events versus the movies version. In the movies version where I made a conscious decision not to invite this person, I thought of it and then I didn't because I was being selfish. Like, because that's what the movie is implying. The movie is implying that he, at least I assume, because he has a crush on this teacher and he also has kind of complicated feelings about Leslie, he doesn't invite Leslie because he wants this alone time with the teacher.
Right.
Is kind of what it feels like the movie is going for. They never really outright say that, but that's what I
think
assume.
that's the implication, yeah.
Whereas in the book, what is happening is he just doesn't think of it because he is so excited. And yes, obviously in both of those situations, you're going to feel guilty and bad about your decision and what happened, you feeling like what you did resulted in this tragic outcome. But in the one where you don't even think about it, at least to me, I would be able to move past that, I think, a lot easier than in the one where I thought about it and then made a conscious decision not to do the thing. Maybe? I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm having trouble articulating what this change feels like to me. Maybe I just think it's unfair of the movie to put that on Jess. I think that's true. I think it's true in the sense that but I think that's maybe to me what makes it more powerful is that because either way it's not his fault. Like it's not, you know, I don't think the movie is clearly not putting it on him. And I guess I get see your point in that by making it a conscious decision, like maybe you could make the argument that he is more guilty in some way. I don't know. I don't think the movie's putting it on him, and I think I guess I get what you're saying, but I don't know. I think both of them work, and like you said, I don't think necessarily one works better than the other. My point is just I think that the movie's version is like a harder thing for him,
Yeah.
or like a harder thing to come to terms with. Like again, if it were me in that situation, to me it would feel like that would be a harder thing to come to terms with.
But I'm not sure that the movie grapples with it any differently than the book does, despite making what is arguably a major change to his motivation.
I don't think it needs to, because I think in either way it's the same. I don't think the movie needed to make a change in how he comes to terms with it, other than maybe it would take longer, and maybe the movie doesn't show that or whatever. I don't think he needs to do any extra work necessarily in the movie's version of events to like be able to come to terms with what happened, because I think he's equally not at fault in both. It's not his fault of what
Yeah, I
happened in both
agree.
of them. It's just, and I guess what you're saying is that the movie maybe doesn't do the extra legwork to have him grapple with, but I think it does, because to me it felt like he does grapple with that. Like he literally says that in, and again, without having read the book, I don't know how he grapples with it in the book, but in the movie he does say outright to his dad or whatever at one point, like, I didn't invite, like or he said something to somebody about not
Hmm.
inviting her because he didn't want her to come, or because something. I don't remember what it was, but he does grapple with that. And I guess I could see the argument that maybe it's not as much or enough or something, but I don't know. I thought the movie's version worked perfectly. Again, I think they both work from everything you've said about the book. They're just slightly different,
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. There was a moment when they're at Leslie's house, paying their respects, that I really thought the movie was going to do, and I was a little surprised that it didn't. Um, that I thought was really impactful. So he's there, and he hasn't really accepted it yet. He's still in his like denial stage of grief, and then he hears her dad say that they had her cremated, and he immediately freaks out because he realizes in that moment that he will well and truly
Right.
never see her again.
Yeah, there's definitely an extra level of finality
Yeah.
to that, at least in our dumb ape brains.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, it doesn't really change anything. Like,
Right.
but yes, there is an extra layer, especially when you're, like, yeah, you can't. Yeah, no, that. I think that's a very it would have been a very intense scene
Mhm.
to have in the movie. Which, not that the movie does not shy away from having intense scenes, but yeah, I like that detail. Or
Yeah.
I say like, you get what I'm saying.
It was very impactful.
Yes, yeah.
And this is another thing that I don't think was mentioned in the movie. Again, if it was, I missed it. It was blink and you miss it, maybe. But at the end of the book, we find out that all of the parents actually totally knew about Terabithia.
Yeah, I don't think this is in the movie.
And Jess's dad is also dealing with guilt because he could have replaced the rope with something sturdier, and he just like never got around to it.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that's in the movie.
I don't think it is either. But no,
that's interesting.
Yeah, that added to me like an interesting layer of then like his dad helping him
right
cope with that grief.
Yeah.
We see in the movie that Jess puts a picture he drew of Leslie on like a little boat and sends it like down the creek. I like the little boat, but I also liked the scene. There's a scene in the book where he makes like a funeral wreath for her and like carries it into the woods in Terabithia and like asks the spirits of Terabithia to like guide her or protect her or something like that, which I thought was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then my last note here is that at the end of the book,
I think he does say something like that in the boat scene.
He might.
He says something like, she's yours now. He says something about that. It's like a similar idea.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I also thought the movie kind of whiffed on the portrait of her that he drew, because we see his drawings and they're like way better than that portrait was.
Yeah, it's not great.
It's not a great portrait.
Yeah.
I think they could have done better. Anyway,
you an art critic now? You an 11-year-old art critic now?
Because I know he can do better than that.
Yeah.
So at the end of the book, we find out that Leslie's parents give Jess all of her books and her art supplies because she would have wanted him to have them, which I thought was really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
This is a shorter list because we already talked about a lot of the stuff that I really liked in the movie and your questions.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the movie's change of him finding out that Leslie lives next door to him after the first day of school. After they have all of the like tension with the race and everything. Because in the book, he actually meets her that morning, like before they get to school.
Yeah.
And then she shows up at school and he's like, oh, that's that weird girl that moved in next door. But I liked the switch up of like encountering her at school and like having that tension with her.
Right.
And then
being
she,
like, oh.
she gets off the bus with him and he's like,
"Son of
oh
a-"
my God.
Yeah.
A line addition that I liked when they're talking about how Leslie doesn't have a TV at home, and she's like, my dad says it rots your brain. One of the bully kids is like, well, we watch TV every day, and she's like, I rest my case.
Yeah. Got him.
Sassy little line. So in the book, she does write the essay about scuba diving, but the movie adds, and I thought this was really interesting, the movie adds that she's never actually been scuba diving, and she just made it up.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really fun way to introduce us to the idea of like how imaginative she is.
No, I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Jess's mom, I kind of hated in the book. She's really, she's just irritable. She's just grumpy the whole time. And I get it. She's got a hard life. I understand. But every time she was in a scene, I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't want to read about her. So I liked that the movie kind of softened her out a little bit and gave her a little bit more. She doesn't have a ton of personality.
No,
she's not in the movie much,
but she gives some. She gets some moments where she gets some looks to the dad and is like, "Come on, man," and some stuff like that. And you see, she has some nice little moments here and there.
She does not really in the book. The way that they tell him that Leslie's dead, I thought went much nicer and gentler in the movie.
It's funny because I actually thought he like kind of just blurted it out in a way that I
he
thought
does.
was, yeah.
He says your friend Leslie's dead.
Yeah.
But in the book, what happens is that one of his older sisters says your girlfriend's dead.
Okay, yeah, no,
that's way worse.
Way worse. Yeah.
I also liked the detail of him seeing the police cars outside of Leslie's house afterwards. That doesn't happen in the book. Maybe the town is too poor for police. I don't know. I liked the little scene where we see his dad come in while he's asleep and like take his shoes off and cover him with the blanket. I thought that was really sweet.
I also had a note about this specifically. Obviously, because I thought there's so much brilliant little filmmaking in this moment. Obviously, you get you see his dad actually caring for him and stuff, which and kind of being tender with him without. He can do it when he's asleep or whatever. In this moment, there's a lot of like complex emotions going on there and that sort of thing. But you can really see that his dad does care about him and is like, looking out for him and that sort of thing. But one of the little details that is not remarked upon or anything that I thought was just incredible that shows, I think it's a thing that most people might, or a lot of people might not even notice. Yeah. I barely noticed it. I initially didn't. And then I was like, oh, is that when he takes his shoes off, he has the shoes that he takes off him are black Adidas, which is when he got his sister's shoes earlier, they were like pink Adidas, and he like scribbled them over with black Sharpie.
Yeah.
So they weren't pink or whatever, so they weren't girl shoes. But in this moment, when they take the shoes off, he has these black Adidas, and they never talk about this, it's never mentioned, but it's clear in that moment that they got him the shoes that he wanted. And if you think back on a lot of things, his dad mentions, I'm going to be picking up some extra shifts on the weekend, managing shifts at the store and all this sort of stuff. So it's clear, without saying a single word, we have established the fact that just from the kind of the natural like progression of the story and the things that have kind of been happening in the background, that they not only that both of his parents, but specifically his dad, and this that they knew they noticed what he wanted. They worked hard to get the thing that, like I said, his dad picked up these kind of extra shifts or whatever, or was managing on the weekend and got a promotion so that they could get him this thing that he wanted. They clearly got him these new shoes that are the thing that he was trying, that he wished he had in the beginning of the movie. And they look used, maybe, like they don't look, they look kind of beat up, or maybe they're not. Maybe he just been wearing them for a while at this point. But I thought that little detail of, unless I'm wrong and they're just the colored ones, but to me they looked
actual black Adidas. Yeah.
And that little detail I thought was just such a brilliant little thing that I don't know if that was an art director or whoever, or cop wardrobe, whoever, or did the director, I don't know, whoever's idea that was. like that is the kind of little thing that when you're making a movie that is so easy to not think of or to not do or whatever, but just adds so much to the story without, again, saying a single word.
Yeah.
Without anything. It's just like adds so many layers and so much to it. Without again uttering a single word about it. It's just so good.
My last note here, you mentioned Janice standing up for Jess to the other bully kid following Leslie's death. I actually liked that moment.
No, I like the moment, and again, I'm not. I also liked it.
Yeah,
I didn't.
I think that is Janice's love language.
Sure, I get it. It's just it felt like with it happening twice, where it just seemed to be like just punch these kids in the face. It just felt a little easy of like violence is the answer. And again, I'm not even saying it's not necessarily in this situation. I'm just saying that I don't know.
You heard it here, folks. Violence is sometimes the answer.
Sometimes, but it is. Yeah, I don't know. No, I also liked that moment overall. Yeah. Like again, I don't want to. I'm not saying it. I didn't like it because I did. I could also understand being like, okay, well. Maybe we don't punch all of our problems. Anyways. All right, let's see what Katie thought that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Again, we already talked about a lot of the stuff that I originally had on this list, but I do have some details to run through. Both the book and the movie do start with Jess getting up early to practice running. Mm-hmm. His older sisters constantly bickering, very, very obnoxious.
Yeah.
Very annoying anytime they were on screen or on page.
Which is not much, but...
Yeah, but very annoying.
Yeah.
Leslie does join the boys' race, and Jess is winning until she, easily passes him. Mm-hmm. Jess has his crush on the young, pretty music teacher. Mm-hmm. Leslie doesn't have a TV at home. Leslie does gift Jess some paints. I believe it's for Christmas in the book and not for his birthday, but same thing. And Jess gets Leslie a dog whom she names Prince Terrian.
Terrible idea, by the way. Don't give another kid a pet.
It's fine. Her parents are rich hippies.
It was fine. It was fine.
It was fine in this instance. But yes, probably don't do it.
Yeah.
They do paint Leslie's living room gold in the book. Very bold choice.
It looked great.
It did. Leslie's response to Janice's dad being abusive to be like, oh, I don't have a TV and people made fun of me. That is basically the same thing, girl. Yeah, you're right.
Is that, I don't remember that.
When she goes to talk to Janice to find out why she's crying. And then when she's telling Jess about it later, she tells him that Janice's dad is abusive.
Right.
Like really abusive.
Like physically abusive.
Yes, physically abusive. And then
she compares that to the fact that she doesn't have a TV.
Yes.
Okay.
And and then Janice asked me for advice and I told her about not having a TV and how everybody laughed at me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what I would want to hear if I were Janice in that moment, but I guess it worked. I guess.
Apparently, yeah.
Leslie does go to church with Jess's family. Jess does accuse his family of lying about Leslie's death initially.
Yeah.
His dad comforting him at the end, we talked about. This was supposed to be a better in the movie note. Okay. Better in the movie. A weird random thing that I did not at all remember about this book is that there's a ton of fat phobia in it. Like a weird amount. Maybe it was just the era.
Yeah, I say all the way up until very recently. That's
fair.
Fucking Harry Potter is full.
That's true. Yeah,
it's a constant.
But Jess's older sisters, his teacher, Janice, no one is immune to this.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we got a handful of odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. So my only big criticism of this film is that the audio mix in this is not amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed this, but so it sounded to me like basically all of the dialogue in this is ADR, and that's not uncommon necessarily. So ADR, for people who don't know, is automatic dialogue replacement or automated dialogue replacement. Point being, a lot of times in movies, very much of the dialogue you hear was not recorded when they were doing the actual scenes. Very often it is recorded after the fact and added in and mixed into the scene because it's very hard to get really
hard
good
to
audio.
get clean, good audio
Yes.
when you're on set.
Now, it's not impossible, and lots of movies do have in the moment, in the scene dialogue, especially depending on the scene where it is and stuff like that. It's easier or difficult, if they're outside and it's super windy or in a public place or whatever, it's more difficult. But other times if you're in like a quiet setting, it's whatever. It's a mixture. But in this one, it felt like almost everything was ADR'd, and that's not the problem, because again, lots of movies have lots of ADR and you don't even notice it. But good movies. This one, to me, it felt like it was slightly overmixed or something. Like the dialogue was like too hot, or I don't know what it was, but it all just sounded a bit off to me. Not all the time.
When you say the dialogue was too hot,
like either too loud in the mix, like when I say overmixed, like it was too loud in the mix of everything else, or that there maybe wasn't enough. I'm not a sound engineer, and sound is one of the hardest fucking things in film. It's so hard to do good sound mixing. Like good sound mixers and sound editors specifically are like, they're doing magic, in my opinion. I understand a lot of the other facets of filmmaking, but oh god, sound mixing and sound editing is so difficult to do well, in my opinion. But or I guess I should say it's one of the easiest things to do poorly. It all sounded slightly off to me, and it's not constant. Like, there are at times in the movie that are better than others, but there's a whole lot of scenes where I could just tell that all of this dialogue in this scene was not was ADR, and it was not mixed quite well enough for me to not notice that. And it was, again, not to the point where it was like horrible. Like, if you're a good Bad or Bad fan, none of it was like on the level of a lot of the movies we watch where it's just like atrocious and very clear that this was recorded in a sound studio at a different date and just slapped on, where like the mouths don't match up, or like the levels are way off, or like, it was close enough that it, like, I think general audiences wouldn't notice, but as somebody who does video and stuff, I noticed, and it was just noticeable enough that I was like, like, it was just right on that edge of like, so that was really, again, my problem and my only criticism, like main criticism of the movie, is I just thought the audio mix was not amazing, but it is what it is.
I thought it was really interesting that the movie chose to set Leslie apart from her classmates by having her be like an artsy weird girl, instead of having her dress quote unquote like a boy, like she does in the book.
Oh, okay. So that is what I said at the beginning.
She's like a tomboy. She always wears pants, and it's scandalous because it's the 70s,
right?
Or at least
which they allude
mildly
to, obviously,
scandalous.
in the movie with
but that doesn't work in 2007.
No,
so we have to do something different. And I thought it was really interesting that they went with artsy weird girl.
Yeah.
And I think it works especially well because Leslie is kind of an OG manic pixie dream girl.
Oh, and it's perfect that Zoe Deschanel is the adult that Jess is into, because she is like,
he's got a type.
Yeah, he's got a type, and it is the manic pixie dream girl. Yeah, I think it definitely works, and I think it also works really well with what I was talking about earlier when I asked about her being a writer, and I liked the dynamic of these two kind of weird art kids, finding each other. I thought
they do.
Yeah. And so I think having that be her angle as opposed to like, a tomboy or whatever, I think works. Speaking of Zooey Deschanel, though, I was like, look, man, I get it. I would also have a crush on Zooey Deschanel if she were my teacher in middle school. But that being said, in those early scenes, he is straight up just slack-jawed, staring, like aggressively staring at her. Everybody else in the room is like singing, and he's just like he's like the cartoon of like the wolf with his like jaw on the desk, like drooling and his ooga ooga. It's like, come on, man, come on.
Keep it together.
You gotta be a little more, a little less obvious than that.
Oh, something that really stuck out to me on this watch too was how aggressively 2007 Zooey Deschanel's styling and costumes were.
Yeah.
Holy leggings. Oh my God.
I think that's true of everything Zooey Deschanel's in. I wonder if she styles herself and if she is just the most aggressively of the era she's in styled. Because everything I've ever seen Zooey Deschanel in, I feel like she looks so aggressively like the time period that thing takes place in. And I wonder if that's...
Is that just because we've primarily seen her be in like late 2000s, early 2010s stuff?
Could
though?
be, yeah. I mean, I am, yeah,
because
to be fair.
That era has a pretty aggressive look to it.
So it is like, yeah, this fucking a couple other movies and then
New Girl.
It's like, yeah. That's
and
fair.
She has a very specific style that was popular at that time in New Girl, too.
That's true, yeah.
Very twee.
Yep. I don't know if you noticed, but so Jess's little sister, Maybelle, this cracked me up, and I'm disappointed. I almost didn't put this note in there, but I was worried I was going to forget because I wanted to reveal who it was to you live on recording.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So you Googled it because I put this note in saying, because I was going to put, oh my God, it's whatchamacallit, but then I was like, no, I'll just make this note so I remember, but then of course I should have known you would Google it. But I wrote, did you recognize who Jess's little sister is? The actress who plays Jess's little sister. It cracked me up because I was like, oh my God. I know this, and I was like, oh, that's who it is. So we are currently we are currently watching Once Upon a Time, as we have mentioned in several episodes.
We've been watching it for a long time.
It's 7 seasons of old school TV where there's 26 episodes a season and it's 45 minutes. It's true old school TV. It is 26 episodes a season, 45-minute episodes. So yeah, it's taken us a while to get through it. I mean, we're in towards the end of the 5th season, so. But anyways, actually the middle of the 5th season. But his sister is played by the actress who plays young Snow White.
Yes.
In Once Upon a Time, and as soon as I realized it, I couldn't stop seeing it. And the like brattiness that she has, just immediately, I was like, oh, yep, that's her. That's incredible.
But I don't think that she looks freakishly like Jennifer Goodwin in this.
Not as much, because she grew into that, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because this is like 5 years before she was doing but yeah, no, that was the thing that was crazy to me when we were watching Once Upon a Time and young Snow White shows up in that show, is that actress looks so insanely
it legitimately looks like they de-aged.
Yes, it looks
Jennifer Goodwin.
It's crazy. It's crazy how much she looks like a young, and that show actually does that pretty good job of that generally.
Yes, yeah.
Because like young Emma also looks a lot like Emma, but yeah, in particular that the girl this actress, I can't remember, Bailey something, who plays her, is just she looks so much like Snow White as an adult, but as a kid it's terrifying. It's like they cloned her in a lab.
Did you notice that at one point Jess's older sisters are watching Hannah Montana on TV?
I saw them. I couldn't tell what it was, but
100,000% they were watching Hannah Montana, and then a Miley Cyrus song from Hannah Montana plays over the credits.
I knew I recognized that, but
at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
Not Disney squeezing their biggest moneymaker of the era into this movie for absolutely no reason. I have no beef with Miley Cyrus or Hannah Montana. I just thought this was funny.
Yeah. My last note, and it absolutely killed me, is that we see them at one point in Terabithia. I think they're running from the Dark Master. I can't remember.
Yeah.
They're running for some reason. And they do this effect in the movie of them because like we see them earlier like jumping up into trees and stuff,
Yeah.
and they have like kind of magic powers when they're in Terabithia, or they have like superpowers, and they're running and they're like speed running, and the effect that they do in the movie for them speed running in Terabithia is like literally identical to the effect they do in the Twilight series for the vampires like speed walking or speed running. It's incredible. It was killing me. Oh my god.
I thought the same thing about the tree jumping too, actually. Like when they jumped up on the branches in that tree, I was like, hold on tight, spider monkey.
I had the exact same thing when they got to the top of that tree and they're like swinging in the top of the trees. My brain went, hold on tight, spider monkey.
Like,
Killed me.
cue up Bella's lullaby
Yeah.
and put a green filter over it.
Yeah, incredible.
Oh, okay. So I have one final note here, and I almost made this its own Lost in adaptation question because maybe somebody can explain this to me. So there's a plot point that was added to the movie where Jess loses his dad's work keys, and it turns out that Maybelle took them and gave them to Leslie, and they're in Terabithia to make bells out of. And so he's able to get the keys back. But the problem with the keys being missing is that his dad is like, I'm going to have to pay to replace them. It's going to come out of my paycheck.
Yeah, and all the locks at work.
Yeah, all the keys, all the locks. I'm going to have to pay to replace everything. All that money's going to come out of my paycheck. We can't afford that.
Yeah.
But so he gets the keys back, but it's an entire day later.
Yeah,
because
he goes to school.
Yeah, he goes to school.
And he finds out from Leslie where the keys are.
Yes.
And then they go
and they go
them.
after school and they get them from Terabithia, and then he gives them back to his dad. And I don't understand what this fixes, because surely he already had to pay to replace everything because it's been an entire day.
Yeah, and it's a school day. The store would have been open
Yeah.
unless somebody else had key. Here's the thing. Here's the only thing that makes sense. I agree, because I felt the same thing. I was like, you need to like call your dad.
Yeah, you need
especially
to,
once
like-
you found out.
Yes.
Like, I know where they are. I'll get them. I'll have them.
Yeah.
Or something. Because I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, he's gonna be at work, right? And he's gonna get them replaced or whatever. The only thing that makes any sense for this is that his dad was off that day.
Yeah.
When and at the end of the scene where they lose the keys, he says to his dad, I'll find him. And maybe his dad gives him, if his dad didn't have to go to work that day,
Right.
maybe there's another manager who has a set of keys who can get in and out. So it's fine that, like, because he didn't go into work that day, he's able to basically not do anything for a day. And
They've
then he
got
gets
some
the keys
time.
back that evening.
Right.
And so it's fine. That's the only thing that makes sense. Because otherwise, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the reason he would have to change all the locks and everything and get new keys is that if they never found them, obviously they would have to replace the locks and everything because somebody else
Right.
could have gotten them and then could break into the store or whatever. But if he literally didn't have to work that day and somebody else like opened and closed the store or whatever,
Right.
then like it would be fine. So that must be what happened.
That must be.
Yeah. That must be. And I guess the thing is that his dad just like either gave his son that time to try to find him or just was like, hopefully he does find him and I'm just not going to tell anybody.
I'm just not going to say anything until I absolutely
have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like until I have, like maybe he was going to work the next day and was like, I'll tell him then when if I don't have him.
I'll just wait this out in the meantime.
Yeah. I think it works kind of, but I agree that it was something that I was also thinking about during the movie.
The moment in the movie, I was like, I don't understand how this solves the problem.
Yeah.
I feel like the problem is still present.
All right. We wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Goodreads. Give us a like, a follow, subscribe. We want to hear what you have to say about Bridge to Terabithia. How much did you cry? Just tell us. Just interested to know.
I need to know what the volume of your tears
Volume
were.
of tears measured in milliliters, please. But yeah, we would love to hear what you have to say. We'll talk about that on the next prequel episode. If you want to do us another big favor, you can head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to our show. Drop us a little 5-star rating, write us a review. We'd really appreciate that. Helps get this show out to more people. And then finally, the best way you can support us is by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Give us a few bucks a month. Starting at the $5 and up level, you get access to bonus content. Katie, but last month we did a bonus episode on
You can do it.
No, hold on. It was October. It was a Halloween, but it wasn't a Halloween movie, but it was thematic. I can't remember. What did we do?
It was Black Swan.
Black Swan. That's it. We did Black Swan. So if you want to hear us talk about Black Swan, you can do that right now. And then before too long here, we'll be doing our November episode, which is going to be on, and I just looked this up and I remember it's a thing, the menu. We're going to be talking about the menu. So check for Thanksgiving. Perfect. It thematically makes sense. Eating the rich.
I didn't even do that on
Thanksgiving.
purpose.
Yeah. But yes, we'll be talking about the menu this month. And you get that, like I said, for $5 and up a month. And then if you support us for $15 or more a month, you get access to priority recommendations. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
This is actually a little harder than I thought it would be. The book is obviously a beloved classic, but I enjoyed the movie much more than I thought I might, especially based on my vague memories of watching it in theaters in 2007. I basically recalled it being a little cringy, which is likely my memories of the CGI imaginary parts. And let's face it, I wasn't wrong. They are a little cringy. But I liked a lot of the changes that the movie made, in particular the ways that they managed to update the story's set dressing from 1977 to 2007. And beyond some of those changes, a lot of this adaptation was actually very faithful. But for me, I think this one really boils down to each version's ability to adequately convey what it was like to be a kid and playing pretend with your best friend, and the natural push and pull of how that experience was both very easy and kind of difficult at the same time. I think that being in Jess's perspective as he struggled to learn a new method of play from Leslie helped a lot, and not having a visual to show me what they were supposed to be imagining helped even more. So for mainly that reason, I'm giving this one to the book.
All right. Fair enough. Just to tack on, I don't think I ever said this explicitly, but I really liked the movie. I thought it was really, I mean, I think that's clear from our discussion, but I thought the movie was really good, like really well done. Again, other than the technical aspect of kind of the audio mix. And I thought it was really touching and just beautifully handled. And I thought everything about it was great. Like basically, again, other than a few small minor things. So definitely a close one. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are going to be talking about the book Bodies Are Where You Find Them by Brett Halliday, and its 2005 film adaptation, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
No idea that was a book.
Me either.
Fascinated to read this. So this is also going to be a Switch episode.
Yes.
I am reading this. I have not started it yet. It's a pretty short book though. So if you do want to read it, if you can find it,
it might be hard to find. It's out of print.
But it's an incredibly short book. Like it's a little, like 150 pages or something.
It's a little like pulp detective novel kind of a thing.
I am very interested to see, one, the adaptation, but two, I haven't watched this movie in a while. I loved this movie. I've seen it probably 2 or 3 times. We watched it once.
I know we watched it. I have like no memory of it.
We watched it several years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Like closer to the beginning of our relationship.
I don't know if it was that early, but it's been at least like 3 years. Like I
think it's been longer than that.
Very possibly, but it's definitely been a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did watch it at one point. I know for sure there's stuff in it that has not aged great. It's just Shane Black. He's an interesting writing style. There's some stuff in it, I'll just say, that I know we're gonna be like, oh boy. But that being said, I've always loved this movie. Like I said, I've seen it a handful of times, and I think it's just brilliantly written, brilliantly acted. It stars if you haven't seen it, stars Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer is in the 2 leads with an assortment of other fun characters. But just a delightful romp of a detective film, full of homophobia. Can't wait. It's
perfect.
Well, one of the main characters is gay, played by a straight guy. But anyways, his nickname is literally Gay Perry in the movie. And he is a hero, but there's a lot of homophobia on top of that. And some of it, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm just very excited to revisit it and very excited to see how it translates from the book. Because I'm a big fan of this movie from what I recall. So that's going to be our next episode, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That'll be in 2 weeks' time. And in 1 week's time, we're hearing what you all had to say about Bridge to Terabithia. So until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.